All right, welcome, boys and girls, to another episode of the IDP Plus podcast with your host, Steve Thomason, aka Dynasty Santa, and I'm joined by my co-host, handsome co-host, Matt Record, aka M Record 21. And Matt, we are bringing the people this week some redraft linebacker tiers. So we had a few
That we
different
are.
members. We had a few different members from the team rank these, right?
Yeah, we had about five or so folks from the IDP guys take the top 20 at each position and kind of separate them out into five tiers. We can really talk about the different tiers at each position. If you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe, comment on the video. We really appreciate that, and that helps out the channel. But you will be seeing sort of where I and Steve had these players ranked in our tiers compared to what the average ended up being. So yeah, I'm excited.
Awesome. Yeah, so we figured we brought you guys before, some top tens at each position. But we don't want you guys to be, ranking slaves. So we broke them out into tiers because, just because one guy is positioned one spot ahead doesn't always mean we would take that guy 100% of the time. So we're going to kind of talk you through some of the top guys at the positions this year and where we have them grouped together and why we have them grouped together. So we're going to start from the bottom here. So we in tier 5, we have just 2 players. So which means like kind of still like these guys, but they're sort of like the fringe end of like the top grouping of linebackers. So in the tier 5, we have Seattle Seahawks linebacker Jordan Brooks, along with the Detroit Lions rookie linebacker Jack Campbell. So for me, starting with Brooks, right, is that he tore. It was either I can't remember. It's either ACL or Achilles. I think it was ACL because Achilles he wouldn't be back at all. ACL in like week 17 or 18, so the very end of the season. So the chances of him playing right away are almost slim, none, basically 0%. There's no projections yet that I've seen about when he's going to be back, but it would be mid-season at the earliest. So in redraft, he's really a conundrum for a lot of people because we don't know when he's going to be back, and will he be playing to the same level when he comes back? So Jordan Brooks is kind of the end. Like he deserves to be drafted, I guess. I know I'm personally kind of staying hands off. What are you doing with Brooks, Matt?
Yeah, pretty much until there's any material change in terms of his injury prognosis, I'm just not going to touch him, right? Unless it's a best ball draft or very late in redraft, which again, we are redraft focused for this episode. I'm going to let someone else take that risk, kind of like the Shaquille Leonard stuff last year, where he's healthy, but no, he's not. Like I'll let someone else wish that roster spot and take some of these other guys around him.
So yeah, Jordan Brooks, I think our stance on him is let somebody else take on the headache. I guess, yeah, if you have IR spots, it's likely that he'll be on the IR, but I'm just concerned that, they brought back Bobby Wagner, they signed Devin Bush. If those two are playing really well, they're not going to have much reason to especially rush Jordan Brooks back. So yeah, I'm going to let him be somebody else's problem. Now, Jack Campbell, I listed as a tier 4 guy myself. However, he could be another guy that is a bit of a slow start because for some reason, the Lions are dead set on continuing to give Alex Anzalone snaps. So we might see, early season frustrations with Jack Campbell, which is why he's kind of towards the end of the tiers here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's why I had him as a 5 as well. Just people love, and we always say this, and it's kind of a cliche at this point, but people love the shiny young rookies, right?
Sure.
Granted, we liked what Jack Campbell did in Iowa, right? We liked the landing spot and how much draft capital the Lions took to get him, right? And it fits in what we think is an obvious need for that team. So we want him to just come out of the gates swinging, absolutely crushing it, right? But I'm more risk averse. I'm more pump the brakes with those rookies, especially in redraft, especially on defense, where there's seemingly more of a learning curve to get in the NFL body ready and actually being productive players right off the bat. Sure, there are exceptions, but they are exceptions, not so much the rule. So we like all these things about Jack Campbell. The ADP I'm seeing for him is just too much for me. I'd rather have the people who are drafting. I mean, the fact that he's already on this list as a top 20 guy, right? That means we're expecting at least LB2 numbers, right? Which I think he's eventually going to get there throughout the NFL season. But as you said, this being redraft, if he starts slow, he's not going to make up the draft capital you need from him. And or by the time he picks up speed, maybe your team's already lost more games than it can to come back. Right. So that's one of those things where like he's I think he's worthy of being on this list there. For me, tier 5 is I think about right.
I'm just gonna say I'm gonna preach patience with him. Like I said, early in the season, it might be a little frustrating. He might not be kind of like what we saw with Quay Walker, where he kind of came along later in the second half of the year. I think something very similar might happen. Although Devondre Campbell is way better than Alex Anzalone. As you can see, we're coming up here on Devondre Campbell, and Alex Anzalone is not on this list. So it's kind of crazy. We hope the coaches figure it out earlier than total midseason, but I will say, try to have patience. If you take Campbell as a redraft linebacker, then, if he's your number 1 first linebacker, like that might not be so great, especially early in the year. So I would say if he's a number 2, that's a nice number 2 to have. But if you're punting so far where Campbell's your first linebacker, I think you might just need to take some more depth after him. So moving into tier 4, we've got Shaq Leonard, a big question mark this year, Tremaine Edmonds, Devondre Campbell, Pete Werner, and Patrick Queen. So all tier 4 guys. Now, I'm going to call out my couple differences here. I've got Tremaine Edmonds as a tier 2 guy. I'm really high on him versus consensus, I think. He's one of my guys that I'm way higher on than a lot of people. I also have Devondre Campbell as a tier 3 and Patrick Queen as a tier 3. So did you have anybody that differed like crazy there, Matt?
Let's see. Nothing really like crazy. I guess we both had Shaquille Leonard as tier 5, whereas the average was 4, which we can talk about in a second. Otherwise, I'm not overly mad about it. Like we both like Queen more than the general consensus, but no, I think that's all about right. So I mean, I just mentioned Shaquille Leonard, right, as an example of like the Jordan Brooks. So it's kind of funny that they're kind of next to each other. How are you handling good old Shaquille Leonard this year?
Very similar to Jordan Brooks. I kind of want him to be somebody else's problem. I mentioned that I had him as a tier 5 guy. I mean, if it's Shaq Leonard versus Jack Campbell, I personally would want Jack Campbell because I know he's going to be healthy and on the field. I mean, people are resorting to drafting EJ Speed as a handcuff almost to Shaq Leonard, which I think is just crazy. And I just don't want the headache there. So yeah, like a great comparison is Leonard versus Campbell, and give me Campbell and let Leonard be someone else. Unless we get, we are just starting week 1 of preseason, right? Unless we get some sort of glowing reviews about his health that he's absolutely going to be ready for week 1, I might change my tune. But as of right now, we haven't had that information, and it's all still very murky. And like I said, EJ Speed name is being called out. So until we get 100% certainty, I really don't want much to do with him at all.
Yep, I'm in the same boat. I'm surprised our compatriots have him at a tier 4 there. I think there's a lot of, I mean, especially in redraft when you're playing with people that aren't necessarily as tuned in to the ins and outs of roster management. Shaquille Leonard was a big name a few years ago, and he was great, right? And he still carries that name power. Not saying that's what happened with our coworkers. I'd be interested to hear them defend themselves, but they're not here, so they can't. But just know people are going to reach for some of those players, which will let other people sort of fall to you. So I think that's an important part of this exercise that you sort of touched on there, where when people are in these tiers, like I think people are going to have their own opinions of who's higher in that tier than others. But in general, this means that we think of these players as kind of all about the same, right? So if you have your personal preference of saying, yeah, I really like Tremaine Edmonds there versus, a Devondre Campbell, then like, cool, no one's going to bat an eye when you take him over that. So otherwise, let's see. Patrick Queen, I think, we're both pretty high on him and his role on that defense, especially in redraft. Obviously,
Mhm.
we expect Roquan Smith to be a monster, which, spoiler alert, we'll talk about him in a little bit.
Yeah.
And we're not too worried about Trenton Simpson taking away anything from Queen, because Queen
Per-
kind of had a resurgence last year. So interesting that we have him in the tier 4, but to me,
Right.
that's someone where if I can get him that late, especially after some of the guys we're about to talk about in tier 3, I'm ecstatic.
Yeah, I mean, even when we saw Queen be really good when Roquan came to town still. I think he was freed up to rush the passer a little bit more, which would be great. I mean, if he can give us 4, 5, 6 sacks this year, on assuming 100 plus combined tackles, that would be a really nice season. And he's playing for a payday somewhere else. I think he probably understands the writings on the wall. 5th-year option decline, brought in Trenton Simpson, kind of we're all assuming to be the heir apparent. So he's probably playing with a bit of a chip on his shoulder this year. So that's why I had him a tier higher. A guy I also had a tier higher was Devondre Campbell. I just think I'm trying to kind of maybe level myself on between Quay Walker and Devondre Campbell. I think if health stays, the same between all of them, I think they might finish very similarly. And do we know, I don't think that Quay Walker is officially taken over like the green dot yet. So if Campbell's, guaranteed those 95+% of snaps and Quay Walker maybe isn't, maybe we're undervaluing Campbell a little bit and overvaluing Walker a little bit until that role change kind of becomes official, which I'm predicting it will be maybe at some point during the season, but starting out in week 1, I don't know that Walker's going to be wearing the green dot and on the field as much as Campbell's going to be.
Yeah, I think part of what's being baked into that is just the perception of injury risk. Like, I know Campbell
Right.
is usually pretty solid. He missed a few weeks last year, but I'll be the
Yeah.
first one to say he definitely missed fewer weeks than I remembered him missing, right? I was
Right.
all drinking that Quay Walker Kool-Aid. So I do think you're right. I think that defense is going to flow through these two, and kind of like talking about the Baltimore Ravens defense, it can definitely support 2 very good linebackers, more so than other teams. So I think, probably balancing expectations for the both of them is probably the safest bet. I still like Quay Walker more. I think, the youth, and he's definitely on the ascension, versus we kind of know what Campbell's ceiling is, right? Which
Right.
in redraft, though, that you don't really mind. It works. Both will work just fine.
And let's not forget that Campbell was sort of a perennial disappointment until he got to Green Bay and maybe his last year in Arizona. So maybe he's figured it out, but it took him a few years to figure this out. Meanwhile, Quay Walker pretty much burst right out of a cannon and had a solid, excellent rookie season, at least for IDP purposes. So, it's going to be really interesting to see how that all shakes out. Just touching on the last couple guys, Pete Werner in this tier. Yeah, I don't know. People love him as like a sleeper still, sort of. He missed, I think, like 6 games last year at least. So hopefully we have him for a full season. But for me, he's fine. He just doesn't excite me too much. He didn't give us a whole heck of a lot more beyond just tackles last year. He didn't give us many splash plays. And that's a fluky thing. So maybe that changes. Maybe he gets a couple interceptions, gets a couple sacks. Now that Caden Ellis isn't there anymore. So I think Pete Warner's got a ton of upside, but he's just kind of like one of these ho-hum guys. He's not super exciting to me, but if you punt on linebacker and he's your linebacker 1, that's a much more solid linebacker 1 than, let's say, a Jack Campbell or the mystery of a Shaq Leonard. So he's fine. And then my guy Tremaine Edmonds, we'll talk about his counterpart. TJ Edwards made it the tier above, and so that's where I kind of disagree. I think Edmonds earned the green dot, but I'll have to double check that. So I think he's just going to be guaranteed more snaps. And, he finally seems to be coming into his own. He's still incredibly young. And I just am really bullish on him in Chicago this year. So do you have any final thoughts on the tier 4 guys?
No, I think you nailed it in terms of the tier 4. Like, you're probably not feeling super great with any of these people as your LB1.
Right.
But as in terms of where you're at with your LB2, you can
They would
pretty
be,
much sell
yeah.
yourself on any of these people, whatever story you want to sell yourself, right?
Oh,
Like,
they would they would be
yeah, with like
phenomenal LB2s for me.
100%. So, because as you can see here on YouTube, again, subscribe. The tier 4 and like right around LB 15 here, or I guess it'd be 14 because there's
14,
yeah.
yeah.
So 14 up. So in your 12 team leagues, like this is where we're
Right.
talking like upper echelon LB2, right?
Mhm.
Versus the fives were sort of lower echelon. So
Exactly.
yeah, all I'm saying, like, it's kind of fun talking redraft these top 20 people because we always get so focused on dynasty and like all the really deep sleepers. But at least in a lot of my redraft leagues that I play, you know, with
Yeah.
family and friends, like we're only starting one linebacker, you know, because that's what I can
Yeah.
convince them to do. So these tiers matter, right? These tiers matter. So speaking
Absolutely.
of, let's hop up the tier 3, which
Oh, yeah.
I'll read through. So we got 6 people in tier
A
3.
larger tier.
Yep, starting with Devin White, Zaire Franklin, Logan Wilson, Quay Walker, TJ Edwards, and Cole Holcomb. Who
Mm.
screams out to you there, Steve?
Um, so the Edwards versus Edmonds thing, I would kind of flip flop them in my own personal. Holcomb's an interesting, like, kind of fringe tier. I think he could fit into tier 4 for sure. So it's interesting that he's kind of the breaking point by our averages there. I did put him in tier 4. I think I would rather have like a Pete Werner or probably a Devondre Campbell than a Cole Holcomb. Just because that system they're so good up front with the defensive tackles, and then of course your TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith on the edges. Like, I just feel like that middle linebacker spot. I mean, go back the past few years. You know, Devin Bush's rookie season was like okay, but even that wasn't great, and that was probably the best true off-ball linebacker IDP season we've seen from the Steelers in a very long time. I mean, Miles Jack's done, not that great. He missed time. Trying to think of, Devin Bush, we've obviously seen getting worse every year in that system. So more so that system just kind of worries me a little bit for the ceiling of Holcomb. I think he'll be a pretty decent enough floor guy, but I mean, there's going to be weeks where he gives you 4 tackles, 5 tackles, and nothing else. And you're going to be like banging your head against the wall, like, and while Patrick Queen's giving you 7 tackles and a sack, you know what I mean? So Holcomb's a guy I think I'm a little bit lower on. I still like him overall, but there's definitely guys in tier 4 that I would rather have above him.
Sure, and that's what makes this exercise so much fun, right? Like I'm a little higher on Cole Holcomb, not a crazy lot higher. I think you can convince yourself of pretty much anything you want to convince yourself of, right? I
These
do
guys are
like
all good.
these are all good, very good to very good players, right? At some point can flash that LB1, you know, ceiling, right? So I think the ones for me that scream out to me, like Zaire Franklin, I have him in this tier. You have him a little higher. He's a fascinating one to me because you kind of have to bake in that Shaquille Leonard unknowingness, right?
Right.
As much as we just talked for a few minutes about how don't trust Shaquille Leonard, we'll believe it when we see it, right? Like at the same
Yeah.
time, it's like when it comes to these tiers, I don't like any questions about people, especially when you're taking those LB1s or top 12 guys to have any sort of chance that their spot is not going to be what it was last year, right? So I
Right.
find him fascinating, and then the Devin White conundrum. We talked about it in a podcast before. Obviously, the potential's there. His usage and his stats have always sort of disappointed to what the expectations are. Granted, where we have him here as sort of like a back half top 10 guy, I think that's actually the realistic expectation. Like we're not going to get that top 3, top 5 season, but he's still an LB1 when he's playing and he has that upside to be very good. So I know the average there is 3. I think our co-workers are just fed up and tired of the Devin White saga.
Understandably so.
Absolutely. I think it's just expectation setting. Like, just know you're not getting that top 5 guy. He should not be one of the tier 1 guys there. But he's better. I think he's better than where we have him here in tier 3. So other than that, Logan Wilson, we've talked about him quite a bit. I think tier 3 is exactly right.
Yeah,
similar reason.
he's like the Pete Werner of this tier, like just a ho-hum guy. They just paid him, so that's good news. He ain't going nowhere for a little while. So
Yeah, so I think that's exactly right. We both have the same exact tier there. Yeah, and then the TJ Edwards, Tremaine Edmonds thing. You're a fan of the team, so I'll take your or you know these players. I'll take your word for it. You're not a fan of the Bears. Sorry, my bad. But there, I think those are two ones where unfortunately we draft before the season starts. Right? If we did draft after we see how everyone starts, hindsight's 2020. I could convince myself in either of those being more fantasy relevant, but yeah, no, I think tier 3 is a bigger list, I think, because it's harder to differentiate these folks.
Right.
Versus, I think once we get to tier 2 and tier 1s, like, yeah, there's clearly some separation there.
The cool thing about the Bears linebackers is I do believe TJ Edwards is going before he's being drafted before Tremaine Edmonds. So if you join me in being bullish on him, you can get him at a really nice value. And after the guy who I think is going to, score less points overall in a TJ Edwards. So that's kind of the nice thing. I think people are still kind of sleeping on Edmonds a little bit as referenced by the tiers here. So you could get both of them, and I think they'll both be really good. And then just kind of let it shake out and drop or trade the one who's not doing as well as the other. But that's what's kind of nice about that situation there.
Heck yeah. Let's move on to tier 2, smaller tier here. It's the only 4 folks. We have Bobby Wagner, Bobby Okereke, Fred Warner, and CJ Mosley. Fun little tier. Again, Steve, what are your thoughts?
These are more guys that it feels like they could easily be tier 3 guys as well. Now, so like Fred Warner, that's who I assigned as a tier 3. He is an amazing real life football player, great in coverage, which is why I have him in tier 3, because those skills don't necessarily translate to the IDP stat sheet. So I'm a little lower on a guy like Warner. Like give me Devin White, give me Zaire Franklin, honestly, above him in a redraft setting this year. Franklin just coming off a franchise record in tackles, and with the cloud of Franklin or of Leonard there, he's probably not going to do that again. But man, if he even gets close, that's going to be a really nice season. So Bobby O for the Giants, I may need to temper my expectation on him a little bit too. I've seen, he's gonna play a lot of the stats, but we've seen that the green dot might be headed for Xavier McKinney, the safety. So does that mean that Bobby O is going to be, sort of rotated? Now, if you look at that linebacker room, we don't know who the hell you would be rotated with, and that's kind of why we're so bullish on him, because there's a big bunch of nobodies there. Gerard Davis just went down for the season, and he isn't very good. There's a couple of like 5th, 6th, 7th round guys, Darian Beavers, Micah McFadden. It just feels like there's nobody else there. So that's kind of what we're assuming is assigning the volume to Bobby O. And that defense is going to be very opportunistic for him to, give you a ton of tackles and potentially some splash plays there. So, but yeah, I don't know. I might be a little too bullish on a guy like Bobby O right now.
No, we both have him there in tier 2. I think just that opportunity and talent sort of meet together, right? And as you mentioned, I'm less afraid, especially with that defense with the green dot going to a defensive back, because to your point, who else is going to even be playing at linebacker, right? Blake Martinez is not coming through that door, right? And taking snaps again. So
that's scumbag. A Pokemon scumbag.
Yeah, so the one player I want to mention here, I mean, you nailed it with Fred Warner. We're both lower on him than our compatriots there. But yeah, let's talk about CJ Mosley for a second on the Jets. So perennial, very good IDP player. Definitely getting up there in age. We know the Jets have put a lot of assets into that defense. There's a lot of youth on there, but no one's really knocking on the door to take away CJ Mosley's spot there. And he's proven kind of year in, year out that he can be very consistent, which at the linebacker spot is a very nice baseline to have, especially in redraft.
Absolutely.
If you're gonna just have a plug and play guy that is just going to be a stud for you the entire year, that's very valuable. So I think because of the age, people want some of these younger players to be better than they end up being. People are kind of sleeping on CJ Mosley. Whereas if I'm getting him as my LB1, I'm very pleased. I kind of see him as someone who's, well, we literally have him at the end of tier 2, right? So, but like definitely one of those players that there is a tier separation, except for some of the players that we liked higher, like Devin White. Like I think he's higher, but yeah, I'm finding I have a lot of CJ Mosley stock just because people just like, no, I don't want him. He's old. They're like, no, he's still pretty good from an IDP perspective.
Yeah, he's a rock solid guy for sure.
But yeah, so as we transition from this tier up, I want you to talk about Bobby Wagner, because you have Bobby Wagner in this tier 1 with, I think, 3 people that all fantasy analysts, I think, will agree should be in the tier 1, right? That is a clear tier separation here. But you have Bobby Wagner in there. What's happening there?
Yeah, I think he belongs there with the top guys, and I'd be more than happy with him as my number 1 linebacker in a redraft league, because they brought him back. He took a 1-year hiatus, joined the Rams. Now he's back because of the whole Jordan Brooks situation. So Wagner is 33, I believe, so no spring chicken. But linebackers are kind of like quarterbacks, man. The elite guys can play into their mid-30s here, and they're still incredibly productive until they just decide to hang up the cleats. So I just think, walking right back into a spot where he's been a tier 1 and number 1 linebacker producer for many, many, many years, I guess I don't see much reason to not have him in that conversation. And, he loses talent next to him. So previously with Jordan Brooks, now he's kind of demoting with Devin Bush next to him, so he's probably gonna have a lot more to clean up. So I think, I just think his floor and ceiling are right there with everyone else in that tier 1 for me.
Yeah, and I think those are totally fair points. This is why you wish there were more than just 5 tiers, right? Because there can be tiers within tiers. But everything you said there makes a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, I still like the 3 people above him more, but would you have him as would I have him as like my 4th option? Like probably you're gonna do some Nick Bolton slander. Is that what's about to happen?
I was gonna say, I could see pulling the trigger instead of Nick Bolton, going for Wagner, for me personally.
Sure. So let's get to that tier 1 to no one's surprise. We have Roquan Smith, Foyesade, Oluokun, and Nick Bolton. So do you have, what order of those 3 do you have them in?
I think I'm actually, one of our articles recently called out, nobody has led the league in tackles 3 years in a row since Jesse Tuggle from the Atlanta Falcons back in the early 90s. But man, with the role that Foye is on right now, he could join Mr. Tuggle there. So I would actually give Foye the number 1 spot within the number 1 tier, then probably Roquan, then probably Wagner, and then probably Bolton for me would be how they would be ranked in my personal tier. Because I just think Foye is a monster right now, and I think that the offense is on Jacksonville's slated to be better, so they might be in more shootouts, which means potentially more on the field opportunities and even more splash plays potentially than just those enormous amounts of tackles that he racks up.
Yeah, I'm always one where I don't want to be the first person taking a player at any position unless like you're one of the first few picks right in the draft, and you have to, like you physically have to. So I'm one where like I will happily take the 3rd guy here of these 3, right? Let someone else determine if they want to take Roquan over Foye. I'll take Nick Bolton. Or someone like really digging the Nick Bolton from last year, even better. Like one of those other two sort of slides to me if I'm in the spot to be able to get him. But yeah, I think the thing of note here is this is pretty much your general consensus top three with Bobby Wagner right there. As you mentioned, you can make the case that he's right there. The way I use these, so I don't want to like necessarily speak a whole lot. I mean, we've talked a million times about how you differentiate these three, and it's kind of personal preference, right? So I just want to talk a little bit of how I use these rankings, right? So for me, I see tiers 1 and 2 being fairly clear, like combining them together. Like those are, I'll even include Devin White in there. You know, the top 8 guys, right? So typically for my strategy in these redraft leagues is I would like to get one of them, right? Kind of your hero linebacker who you can kind of plug and play in there. And then as you sort of mentioned, with the tiers 3 and 4, you sort of said like, wow, I could convince myself of some of these 4s going up to 3s or 3s going down to 4. That just indicates there's a lot more variability with players at that tier. So if you're playing in leagues that you need to have a bunch of those starters, I'm trying to load it up on those guys. Everyone sort of has their guys. You should have yours. You can use our rankings if you want, obviously our opinions on who you should go after where. But just want to say, like, the way I use this is I try to get one from the 1 and 2s and then kind of load up on those 3s and 4s because you never quite know. And especially the linebacker position, well, really all of defense, there's going to be someone that's not on this list that is just going to skyrocket up that we never had any idea was going to do that. So just pay attention to your waiver wires, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, do you have any finishing thoughts on our top 20 tiers for linebackers?
Closing arguments. Really just the being a little bit wary of Nick Bolton. I just think, I'm not sure whether last year was an anomaly or if that's going to be the constant going forward with how they use their linebackers there in Kansas City. So normally it was a much heavier rotation and nobody played 1,000 snaps, where Bolton did eclipse that mark last year, hence why he was such a good linebacker. So that's my only like piece of concern about Bolton. Now, if they decide that they've found the talent and a guy that they want playing 1,000 snaps, then yes, Bolton's going to be amazing. But I'm just unsure of that. And that they have an even deeper room this year. Will Ye's still there, Leo Chenal's still there, and they brought in Drew Tranquil, who I'm not a fan of from the Chargers, but he's there and he's probably going to play. So that's my only kind of like beige flag I will throw out on Nick Bolton. Other than that, like I said, I would take Wagner ahead of him in redraft leagues. I think he's just a little bit safer. But other than that, I think I'm overall outside of Tremaine Edmonds pretty on par with the list we got here.
Heck yes. Okay. Awesome. So yeah, that was the IDP Plus podcast coming at you this week. Again, we're going to go through every one of these positions. Linebackers for this episode. The next one's going to be edge, which is going to have a little bit of a different release schedule just based off of the Fantasy Expo. I know both Steve and I are going to be going there kind of messing with some of the order of operations a little bit. So we're going to get that out there, though. Don't you worry about it. And then, be on the lookout for DBs and defensive tackles. Steve, you have anything to plug?
Just we talked about how these are sort of the top guys, and sometimes we go deeper. Our articles on the website on www.idpguys.org. We are releasing right now and have been basically team by team sort of depth chart dives by division. So you're getting 4 teams per article, and that's where if you're really digging in to these rosters for your deeper leagues, that's the resources you want to use for some of the names that didn't quite make this top list here for leagues that are starting maybe 3 or 4 players at these positions. Those articles are really great, and I think we just released our 4th or 5th one, so we're a little over halfway finished. So just keep your eyes peeled for that, and then that's the primary
content that's coming out in written form, and then we'll try to take care of you here on audio going forward. Sorry we missed you last week. I know I was having house issues, and the cat count has dwindled from 18 to 17. Unfortunately, we lost one of our older cats that we've had us here, so kind of needed a week off. So appreciate you guys sticking with us here.
Yeah, obviously sorry to hear that, but
yeah.
But yeah, we got a lot of fun stuff going on over at the IDP, guys. Sign up for our Masters tournament. You know, we're all over the internet telling you all the cool things we're doing. So just keep signing up for stuff. It's a good time. But yeah. So
Absolutely.
for myself at mrecord21 and Steve at Dynasty Santa, this was the IDP Plus podcast. We'll see you next week.